What's up, guys? Mulligan here with another Pokemon X and Y OU match that I had on Showdown against the user known as H. Lagric? Ladric? Lagric? I know I butchered that name. Anyway, I'm using a different team this time around, and some of you may be familiar with it if you saw the last episode of the Wise Words podcast. If you haven't seen that episode yet, I'll leave a link in the description box below. In fact, go listen to that first, then come back here. That's how important that podcast is. But anyway, let's check out the teams. I'm actually using a stall team with Stealth Rock and Spikes, which is something you don't see much of these days since the buff to defog in X and Y. I personally think it's still better than the stall teams that just run Stealth Rock, but it's debatable. My opinion is definitely in the minority. Maybe I'm just too old school, but I'll save that discussion for another day. The squad is pretty solid, though. My opponent is running a pretty balanced team with some pretty unique choices like Porygon 2 and Rotom H. Togekiss is likely a defog user, so I'll have to find a way to wear it down. But the absolute biggest offensive threat on this team is Manaphy. I will absolutely need to keep Zapdos alive and well. Otherwise, if Manaphy is Tail Glow with 3 attacks, it will outright sweep me. This is a long one, guys, but it gets pretty tight towards the end, so I encourage you to stick with it. But I've said enough. Let's go ahead and jump into the match. I decided to lead with Zapdos, actually expecting my opponent to lead with Manaphy since it can set up on 5/6 of my team. He leads with Rotom H though. I Volt Switch out to Heatran to set up Stealth Rock, since worst case scenario this is Scarfed and Zapdos gets tricked, but that's rare these days. Will-O-Wisp gets revealed instead, and I do see the leftovers here. I set up Stealth Rock as intended, but my opponent stays in here. And he's got a nasty surprise in Hidden Power Ground, which I don't think was the best play, only because there was no way to know what set or EV spread I was running on Heatran. I would have saved the surprise for later on. But I Protect to get some leftovers recovery back, and he was expecting a switch. Now here I switch back to Zapdos, since that's the only other Pokemon that can actually do something to Rotom H without dying or getting burned. A pretty obvious switch on my part, but my opponent does go for HP Ground again. And I land a Toxic on it, and the Will-O-Wisp misses. Not a huge deal because I don't mind Zapdos getting burned since I'm carrying a Cleric on this team. Now here I Volt Switch out, and I'm going to go to Tyranitar, predicting any move but Will-O-Wisp. But he shows a Volt Switch of his own, and goes to Manaphy here. Now I basically have to stay in and crunch to do as much damage as I can. But as it turns out, this is actually a bulky variant, which means Zapdos is definitely the only answer to this Manaphy. The Rain Dance is bad for me, but at least I know now that Manaphy isn't carrying as much coverage. So I go to Aegislash here to really just fodder it off and stall out the Rain turns and scout the set at the same time. He shows the rest. And I'm figuring that Tail Glow is the next move, and it is, so I keep pressure on it by going for Shadow Ball. Now that I've seen Tail Glow rest and Rain Dance though, I know Surf is the last move, so Chestnut's a slightly better switch in, but still isn't great. Don't want to give out free turns by going for King Shield, so I just Shadow Sneak to try to get as much damage in as possible before dying. Surf easily takes me out, but my biggest fear was a second Tail Glow there, so I bring Chestnut in on the free switch since Rain's about to end and I can bluff the Grass move. Go for Spiky Shield first to stall out the last turn, and my opponent goes for Surf. And I stay on the offensive here and go for Hammer Arm. Thankfully, he switches to Ferrothorn, expecting the Grass move, which I don't carry. But I'm going to set up Spikes, figuring Stealth Rock was going to be set up, since Ferrothorn is the only possible rocker on his team, and he does so. Now here I got a little too greedy and went for a second layer, when I should have predicted the switch to Togekiss and gone to Zapdos. He's able to freely switch Togekiss in here to defog, but there's nothing I can do now. I just have to go to Zapdos now and force Togekiss out, and he does indeed go for the defog. But here I'm going to go for Toxic, when I probably should have just went for Volt Switch. I guess I was really hoping he'd stay in so I could scout the set, but there was no reason for him to keep his Togekiss in. He goes to Rotom H. I just Volt Switch out here, and I go to Clefable since it's my Cleric. But he's going to Volt Switch out as well, and he's going to go into Porygon 2 at this point. The only thing I can really do here is Wish Up. So I do so, but my opponent's going to pull a double switch into Aegislash. This tells me that he's carrying Iron Head on this Aegislash, so I go to Chestnut thinking it's still a mixed variant, but he predicts the switch and goes for Shadow Claw. I'm still able to tank the hit and heal the full though, since Chestnut is such a beast. I go for Leech Seed to either start wearing down this Aegislash or anything else that wants to come in. I figured he wouldn't bring in Ferrothorn since I showed Hammer Arm earlier. He shows Reflect though, and that told me he was going to go to Ferrothorn here, which he does, so I set up a layer of spikes, and then I switch out the Heatran to get Stealth Rock back up, and he reveals the knockoff on Ferrothorn. But I stick to the plan, because I wasn't worried about Togekiss coming back in, since I am carrying Toxic on Heatran, but he goes to Manaphy. I'm in a better position here though, since I know his entire set. I go straight to Zapdos, since it can take a Surf even in the rain. And he goes for Surf right off the bat, and as you can see, it does nothing. And I know he probably won't want to stay in now, so I Volt Switch out to get initiative on whatever comes in. He goes back to P2, and I decide to go to Clefable. And here I decide to show my set, and start setting up in his face by going for Calm Mind, since P2 isn't exactly an offensive threat. He recovers up. Realizing what's happening, he goes for Thunder Wave as I Calm Mind again, but it doesn't matter because I'm also carrying Aromatherapy on this set. And I show it here as he goes into Togekiss, which is not a big deal to me since I figured I'd have a few more chances to set up hazards again, given the defensive nature of his team. But I'm going to go for Moonblast just to see how much I do at +2, and it does a pretty good amount, given the fact that I have no special attack investment in this Clefable. He does Defog, of course. I know this Togekiss has to be carrying Roost, and the damage I did to it was good but not good enough, since he can just Roost it off, so I set up a third Calm Mind on the Roost. Here I go for Moonblast to force Togekiss out. If nothing else, he goes back to Aegislash. And I think I got it in my head here that he might not have Iron Head after seeing Shadow Claw and Reflect, so I go for Wish. But it turns out he does carry it, so there goes my plan for an early sweep. Chestnut's still the best switch it I have to this Aegislash, so I go back to it. He goes for Shadow Claw here, probably predicting Zapdos to come in after I saw Iron Head. And I'm not expecting Ferrothorn to come in since Reflect isn't up, so I go right for the Leech Seed, but he does go to Ferrothorn. And here I decide to go to Zapdos, expecting either Stealth Rock or Togekiss to come in on a predicted spikes, but he goes right for the knockoff, which I considered as well. I figured I'd rather have Zapdos who's left over since I have Roost anyway, and I'm actually carrying Rocky Helmet on Chestnut, which I like to keep as long as I can. I just Roost up here. He takes the chance to go back to P2, and my opponent pulls a double back to Rotom-H, predicting Toxic, which I go for. Again, I should have predicted this. I can't do anything else to Rotom-H with Zapdos, so I just Volt Switch out to Clefable, either expecting a Volt Switch from his side or a Will-O-Wisp, and I can deal with either move. He does opt for the former, goes back to P2. Surprisingly, I expected Aegislash if anything. In hindsight, this actually wasn't much of a surprise, as you guys will see later. I wish immediately, so I can try to keep my Cleric alive, and he reveals Charge Beam, but doesn't get the boost, which is big since that means Clefable can survive the next one. The next few turns here are what I like to call the stall war. That doesn't really make sense. I say that because I forgot that P2 has Trace and that he traced unaware, which is why I went to P2 in the first place. The plan was to just Calm Mind up and hit it hard with Moonblast, but that's never actually going to happen. This stall war slightly favors my opponent for a couple of reasons. I'll never be able to actually 2-hit KO this Porygon 2. He would actually PP stall me out first since I've used my Clefable more than he's used his P2. Despite having the same amount of total PP on our moves. He also reveals Ice Beam, and I end up getting frozen eventually, long before that ever happens. So the Aromatherapy came back to bite me in the end. Please don't ever do what I just did here. I have to go to Heatran now since that's the only thing I'm comfortable switching into this now boosted P2 with, and it can't get frozen. He goes for Ice Beam again. I need to get Toxic on it, so I go for it, and thankfully it hits as another Charge Beam comes my way. I go for Protect to Toxic stall, but he knows what's coming, so he recovers. I'm starting to get a little nervous since I don't want to get swept by a Porygon 2. That just feels embarrassing. But I don't want to sack Heatran just to get Stealth Rock up. I actually want to wait until I can take out Togekiss, so I go back to Clefable since it's frozen, it has Unaware, and I can Toxic stall even more if P2 stays in. Worst case scenario, I end up sacking it. He goes for Charge Beam, and unfortunately here I never thaw out, and he follows up with 2 Ice Beams for the KO, which is fine. I'm going to bring Tyranitar in on the free switch since P2 is low enough to where I can threaten it out. And I'm actually going to go for Crunch here. I could have went for Pursuit, but I was still concerned about Manaphy coming in, and I wouldn't be able to put enough pressure on it if I was locked into Pursuit. In hindsight, I was too concerned about it since Zapdos is the switch-in for it if Rain isn't already up. But he uses Free Switch to bring Ferrothorn in, switch to Chestnut, predicting him to predict me to go to Zapdos or Heatran and Leech Seed since they already lost their items. He did in fact Leech Seed. I go right for the Hammer Arm here since now I know a knockoff is coming. I'm fine with it now since I can do significant damage to this Ferrothorn and threaten the 2-hit KO. I expect Togekiss to come in here, so I go for my own Leech Seed and catch it on the switch. I could have just switched to Zapdos instead, but Defog really isn't doing much here, and I really didn't think he would roost either until Togekiss was closer to 50%. Now I go to Zapdos to threaten the Togekiss out, but he double switches back to Ferrothorn. I can't think of a reason why he made this switch other than he thought Ferrothorn was safe from Zapdos. And I say that because he stays in with Ferrothorn, and I reveal my last move, Heat Wave, and KO it. He brings Rotom H back in on the free switch. I was honestly expecting Will-O-Wisp here because Zapdos is at full and is clearly now the biggest threat to his team. So I think he'd want to start wearing it down. So I go to Heatran, but he Volt switches out and goes to Manaphy. A good play on his part. So it's so much for getting rocks back up this match. I have to go for Toxic here. But he just sets up Rain Dance and heals with Hydration. Now I go for Protect so I can stall out the rain turns. But he predicts that and goes for the Tail Glow. I clearly got outplayed the last 2 turns, so I think I tried to just set up Stealth Rock here at this point, but he just finishes Heatran off with Surf. And I bring in Tyranitar on the free switch to cancel out the rain since I don't want Zapdos taking a chunk of damage or catching a crit from Surf. Just trying to minimize hacks is all. I go ahead and lock into Stone Edge, hoping for a crit of my own so I can 2-hit KO this Manaphy, but it doesn't happen. He just sets up rain again. And it's here I decide now's the best time to put Chestnut's resistance to good use. I honestly don't expect too much though since rain is up, but I can stall rain out for a few turns with the water resist and Spiky Shield as long as he doesn't set up 2 Tail Glows. He went immediately for Surf, thankfully. I just hit him with Hammer Arm before going down, and I'm going to be able to safely bring Zapdos in on the free switch. Being down 2-4 though, I'm in a fairly tough spot, but I can still pull off the win. I'm going to go immediately for the Volt Switch so I can go to Tyranitar and threaten Stone Edge. He goes to Togekiss, so that doesn't change the plan at all. And here, I'm actually going to lock into Stone Edge. Stone Miss. And he shows Ominous Wind, which was really weird. I know Ghost Fairy coverage is good, but is it really worth it? He was definitely expecting me to switch back to Zapdos, predicting Dazzling Gleam there. I stay in and go for the Stone Edge, and finish off the Togekiss. He brings Aegislash in on the free switch. I go to Zapdos expecting Iron Head, which he goes for. It's gotten to the point where this Aegislash needs to go, so I can have another option in Tyranitar. I want to be able to lock in the Stone Edge if I need it and not be forced to crunch. Aegislash gets in the way of that, so I have to attempt to PP stall this Aegislash out with Zapdos. Pressure obviously gives me the advantage here since his best move against Zapdos is Shadow Claw. We do finally see the King Shield in this scuffle, so there's no fear of this being some crazy Swords Dance variant, though I guess Reflect kind of gave that away. But after Ominous Wind, I had to be ready for anything. I play this super safe because I can't risk Zapdos going down to a crit Shadow Claw, especially given that Shadow Claw has a higher chance for that to happen than normal. I don't like having to roost while he attacks, but again, I'm minimizing hacks, which is still pretty important in this game. At one point he goes all out and Shadow Claws every single turn after seeing my sequence of moves so he can try to land a crit. But I just end up roosting every turn when I see what he's doing. After a lot of back and forth, Aegislash finally switches out and Rotom H comes in on my roost. I stay in here to Heat Wave because I absolutely cannot have Tyranitar take a Will-O-Wisp, essentially killing one of my 2 options left in this game. He misses the first one, but lands the second one. With Toxic building up here though, it's too late for Rotom H now since I'm just going to stay in and finish it off with Heat Wave. And Aegislash is actually going to come back in. And the war of attrition continues here. But things are slightly different this time. Zapdos is burned, so I'm forced to roost more often. But he has to at least he has to at least be almost out of Shadow Claws at this point. Him going for Iron Head now confirms this. What's cool is that this time I have the sequence that I wanted before, to be able to roost on the King Shield and Heat Wave on his attack. After more back and forth shenanigans, I finally finish off the Aegislash, and his last is Manaphy. This match still isn't over yet. I can still lose. Since I outspeed his Manaphy, I decided to go for Toxic first because even though he has Hydration and Rain Dance, I wanted him to set up Rain first before Volt switching out to Tyranitar so I can cancel it, which ends up happening. This was a risky play, but I want to keep Rain out of the mix, so I double switch back to Zapdos in case of a Rain Dance, but he's going to go for Surf here, which is fine, and I decided to keep this up for the remainder of the match, basically using Tyranitar as fodder to win the Weather War. Unfortunately, I was not able to use it as a sweeper, but the alternative was to just stay in a Crunch or Stone Edge, but I think that was even riskier since Stone Edge could miss and he could also rest off the damage Crunch would do if I don't crit or get a defense drop, and if it's raining he could potentially sweep. I also couldn't allow him to Hydration Rest in the rain in general, otherwise I was probably done since I was very low on Roost PP at that point. Tyranitar does take one for the team, and Zapdos takes us home with the 1-0 victory. It got pretty close at the end, but I think I made the correct plays to pull off the win. Anyway, if you guys liked the battle, hit that like button just below the video. Feel free to share this with your friends if you absolutely loved it as well. It helps me out and helps the channel out. Make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss future content, if you haven't done so already. And if you guys want to follow me, I'll leave links to the social clubs I hang out at in the description box below. But until the next one, guys, take care. Peace.